Introduced in 1970 by American psychologist Gordon Gallup Jr. The mirror self-recognition, Mr. Test, also known as the mirror test or mark test, is an innovative behavioral technique devised to gauge an animal's capability of visual self-recognition, a measure of physiological and cognitive self-awareness. Although some animals have exhibited self-awareness through indicators not covered by the mirror test, such as differentiating their own songs or scents from others, the Mr. Test remains the conventional method employed to explore an animal's self-recognition. The crux of the test involves anesthetizing the animal and applying a mark to an area it typically cannot see, such as the forehead. On regaining consciousness, the animal is presented with a mirror, and its reaction to the mark is keenly observed. If the animal investigates the mark, it suggests the animal understands the reflection to be its own, rather than that of another animal. Gordon Gallup Jr.'s inspiration stemmed from an 1838 account about Charles Darwin's observations of an orangutan named Jenny at the London Zoo. Darwin saw Jenny watching herself in the mirror and theorized that she might recognize her own reflection. Gallup Jr. took this idea and applied it in an experiment using 4 wild pre-adolescent chimpanzees, which likely had no prior exposure to a mirror. Over numerous sessions, a full-length mirror was gradually moved closer to the solitary chimpanzees. As their behaviors were meticulously recorded initially, their reflections were met with defensive threats. However, these confrontational responses eventually transformed into self-directed behaviors, where the chimps utilized their mirrors for grooming inaccessible parts of their bodies, making faces, and even blowing bubbles at their reflection. Few species have passed this test, but those that did include great apes, a lone Asian elephant, rays, dolphins, orcas, the Eurasian magpie, and the cleaner wrasset. Meanwhile, giant pandas, sea lions, and several monkey species reportedly failed the test. The origins and applications of the Mr. Test serve as a compelling avenue to explore the intriguing depths of animal cognition and self-awareness. The classical mark test or rouge test, a method of determining an animal's self-awareness, consists of placing a non-tactile mark on an animal while it's anesthetized. The animal's subsequent behavior towards the mark in a mirror is then observed. Turning the body for a better view of the mark in the mirror or tactile examination of the mark are signs that the animal recognizes its own reflection. These behaviors are a key indication of self-recognition, although other explanations have been suggested. One such alternative interpretation is the idea that animals may perceive the reflection as an odd entity they can control with their own movements. Note that this interpretation does not necessarily involve the animal recognizing the reflected entity as self. One particular study conducted by Gallup involved 2 chimps with no prior mirror experience being marked and observed after recovery from anesthesia. No particular mark, directed behaviors were observed. The renowned rouge test was also executed by Michael Lewis and Jean Brooks, Gunn with human mothers and their children in 1979 to explore self-recognition. The mirror self-recognition test, however, has been scrutinized for potentially yielding false negatives and for exhibiting limited applicability to species that do not predominantly use vision as their primary sense. Dogs, for instance, primarily depend on their sense of smell and hearing, and thus typically fail the mirror test. Considering this limitation, biologist Mark Bakoff developed a scent-based test using dog urine to explore self-recognition in canines. However, the results were inconclusive. Later, another researcher, Alexandra Horowitz, built upon Bakoff's work and carried out a controlled experiment by introducing an additional scent to the canine's own smell. The dog showed signs of self-recognition by investigating the modified scent more than others, much like they would in a traditional Mr. Test. Despite these varied approaches, there's been no definitive answer on how self-recognition can be accurately measured in animals, epitomized by a 2016 study which critiqued the traditional methods for self-recognition testing. Emory University's biologist and primatologist Frans de Waal posits that self-awareness is more of a spectrum than a dichotomy. While he acknowledges the merit of the mirror test as a significant tool for measuring self-awareness, he cautions against its use as the only standard according to him. Animals exhibit varying responses to this test due to their inherent differences. Past investigations have explored different species' proclivity for spontaneous, mark-directed behavior in the presence of a mirror, with most animals first responding with social reactions, such as aggression, usually persistent throughout repeated tests. However, only a select few species have demonstrated self-recognition by intentionally touching or interacting with the mark. hence successfully passing the mirror self-recognition Mr. test. Such Mr. studies often yield inconsistent findings with even the most studied species, chimpanzee having a non-uniform success rate, with only roughly 75 of young adults passing, and significantly fewer younger or older individuals being successful. Prior to a 2008 magpie-related study, self-recognition was believed to be traceable to the neocortex part of the brain, a region absent in non-mammals. Hence, self-recognition might be a reflection of convergent evolution. Similar evolutionary pressures catalyze analogous traits or behaviors across species, albeit via different routes and likely with differing foundational mechanisms. Studies on various species like bottlenose dolphins, killer whales, Bornean orangutans, chimpanzees, and western gorillas have yielded mixed results. Some species showed a semblance of self-recognition in mirror tests, while others didn't. Interestingly, captive gorillas with significant human contact have shown a higher predilection for self-recognition. This may be due to less aversion to direct eye contact than their wild counterparts, who interpret prolonged eye contact as an aggressive gesture and thus evade their reflections in the mirror. Habituation to mirrors before testing and avoidance of anesthesia during the marking process may also increase successful Mr. results, as evidenced by Coco, a gorilla who passed the test under such conditions. The theme of self-awareness as exhibited in several species through the mirror test is prevalent in this story, with fascinating examples from elephants, Eurasian, magpies, pigeons, and cleaner wrasses. Frans de Waal, who led the study on elephants, noted that the behaviors exhibited by the elephants hinted at cognitive evolution, possibly tied to complex societal structures and cooperation. Interestingly, when a tastefully inconspicuous mark was painted on the forehead of an elephant named Happy, her lack of reaction eliminated the possibility of scent or touch stimuli. Among birds, the Eurasian magpie was the first non-mammal to pass the mirror test in 2008, where colored stickers were adhered to their throats, only observable using a mirror. The magpie's subsequent scratching confirmed their self-recognition and the reflection nonetheless. The results were short being reproduced in a more extensive study in 2020, implying the findings should be approached cautiously. Similarly, pigeons showed their capability to pass a highly modified mirror test, as demonstrated by American psychologist B.F. Skinner in 1981. Trained pigeons discovered the relationship between the mirror and their environment while seeking nourishment, managing to use the mirror to unveil a hidden dot on their bellies, however, without training. Pigeons failed to pass the test. Moreover, in 2019, cleaner wrasses, a species of fish, passed the mirror test employing a sympathetic brown gel to resemble a parasite's presence. The fish attempted to scrape off perceived parasites after seeing their reflections, although some scientists chalk this behavior up to instinct rather than actual self-awareness. This story paints a vivid picture of the various degrees of self-awareness found in the animal kingdom and the need for further investigation and nuanced interpretation of these intriguing behaviors. A study published in 2022 continued the exploration of self-awareness amongst cleaner fish as a response to previous criticisms. This investigation saw a larger gathering of wrasses subjected to modified mirror test methods, leading to reinforced confidence in the fish's ability to recognize themselves. This was particularly noticeable when the mark on the wrasse resembled a parasite, compelling the fish to attempt removal. Actions. Experiments carried out in 2016 showcased similar results in captive manta rays. They presented self-consciousness, characterized by contingency checking and unique self-focused activities. However, the mirror self-recognition Mr. test was not universally successful among species. The test failed to evoke a comparable response in creatures like giant pandas, who reacted to their own reflections aggressively, perceiving it as a threat from another animal. Similarly, dogs displayed indifference or mistook the reflection for another canine. Despite instances of self-recognition in a rhesus macaque, such as using mirrors to scrutinize otherwise hidden parts of their bodies, their understanding of self-consciousness remains disputed. On a related note, the Tanganyikan cichlid, a marine species known for its social intelligence, failed the Mr. test. The first reaction noted was one of hostility towards the reflection. Even after the application of a colored mark, there was no change in behavior, implying they didn't acknowledge their own reflection. Similar results were noted in octopuses, gibbons, and pigs as well. They all showed inconsistent reactions indicative of limited self-awareness. Octopuses seemed to be oriented towards their image, but no significant change in behavior was observed. Gibbons failed the mirror test in multiple instances, but subsequent alterations to the test resulted in some Gibbons showing considerable signs of self-recognition. Pigs demonstrated an ability to use reflections to locate food, in some cases showing signs of self-recognition. Yet, a food bowl test also demonstrated that one pig, despite seeing the food's mirrored reflection, sought the food behind the mirror itself, shedding further uncertainty onto their level of self-awareness. In conclusion, the capacity for various species to pass the mirror test and display self-awareness greatly varies, with stronger evidence present in some species more than others. In 2016, scientific findings unveiled the unique ability of archerfish to distinguish between human faces. The study conducted relied on training the archerfish to associate a specific human face with food. Through this, they discovered the fish could recognize and react to this face compared to others by spitting a stream of water. This, in fact, is a natural mechanism the fishes use to catch prey in their wild habitat. Remarkably, the archerfish could maintain the recognition even when the image was tilted to varied angles, such as 30, 60, and 90 degrees. Parallel findings were also witnessed in a different experiment with human children called the Rouge tests. A distinct mark was clandestinely placed on a child's face, and their interactions with the mark upon looking at a mirror were observed. It was discovered that between 6 to 12 months, children considered their reflection as a playmate. Feelings of self-admiration and embarrassment kick in at 12 months, while avoidance behaviors were seen to manifest from 14 to 20 months. The climax of this experiment is when at 18 months, half of the children recognized their reflection, a figure that increased to 65 at 24 months. This discovery was arrived at as children tried to locate or remove the mark on their faces. Interestingly, familiarity with reflective surfaces did not influence self-recognition. The experiment, however, resulted in variant findings with different sociocultural groups. For instance, Cameroonian infants aged 18-20 months recognized themselves only 32 of the time. The experiment also unveiled that interactions such as mutual eye contact and object stimulation influences self-recognition. This period in life is regarded by theorists as significant in development of a child. The Rouge test is cited extensively, indicating self-concept and self-awareness as children identified the rouge mark on their own noses. This level of self-concept also extends to the discovery that animals, young children, and individuals regaining sight sometimes react to their reflection as if it were another individual. Current psychological perspectives acknowledge the role of self-concept in influencing motivation, cognition, emotion, and societal identity in humans. The conducted study re-evaluated the traditional mirror test by making some modifications, which in turn resulted in an increased number of self-recognizers. This process first entailed tidying up the doll, followed by a mirror test in which a rouge dot was used on the child's face. One major critique of this classic test is that it presupposes that children should identify the rouge dot as unusual and attempt to check or erase it. This issue could likely cause false negatives, since the acknowledgement of the rouge dot does not necessarily translate into children attempting to remove it. However, the modified test revealed a stronger correlation between the act of cleaning the doll's face and the child's subsequent action of cleaning their face. This modified demonstration may potentially solidify the authenticity of self-recognition amongst children. Even so, it is not unequivocally established whether the ability to recognize oneself in the mirror is synonymous with self-awareness. The reverse can also be untrue. Having a sense of self-awareness does not guarantee a positive mirror test result. Advances towards making robots pass the mirror test commenced in 2012, underscoring the theme of self-recognition and artificial intelligence.